I found a neat rock. Another mystery to unlock. This one has a crystal bright. Maybe it's some pegmatite. Or could it be biotite or muscovite, anorthite, lepidolite, or estetite? Maybe it's tremolite, chabazite, or naturalite. I don't know what's in my hand, but anyway, it's really grand. I do know that I'll keep this one, because collecting rocks is a lot of fun.
I'd like to welcome all of you to the Iowa City Johnson County Senior Center today. My name's Julie Seal, and I work here at the Senior Center. Our presenter today is Ed Clopton. He is a native of Eastern Iowa and holds a Bachelor of Science degree in Computer Science from the University of Iowa. He has had an eclectic career as a math teacher, a national park ranger, and engineer, and currently an emergency room technician. He's been picking up neat rocks ever since he could walk and has been collecting in an organized fashion, in an organized way, for more than 20 years. Please welcome Ed Clopton.
Well, the topic officially this afternoon is why collect rocks. It's really a good question because rocks, as you see them along the roadside and so on, don't appear real collectible. I should also say that, that being the main topic, my wife Bethany is here to present an opposing point of view, why not collect rocks. We'll maybe hear from her later. Main reasons that rocks appeal to me, there's just some simple practicality, there's aesthetic qualities, there's, believe it or not, some spiritual qualities and some philosophical things about them. From the practical standpoint, just maintaining a collection of rocks, their needs are fairly simple. They don't need to be fed, they don't need to be diapered, they don't need to be repotted or walked or anything like that. They aren't alive, so they don't die like hamsters and goldfish and things do. But they do require enough care. They do require some care because some of them are delicate. When I take selections of specimens to grade schools for kids, I'll have some arrayed and say if you want to look at one, ask, or just point to it and I'll say yes or no. Some of them you could drive over with your car without hurting them. Others I don't touch myself because they're so delicate. So you need to take proper care of them. This is, well, actually what the description said, they don't die, or do they? Well, this one is actually in the process of croaking right before our eyes. It's a pyrite concretion that came from a limestone quarry over by Mount Carroll, Illinois. Pyrite has an annoying tendency sometimes to oxidize. It absorbs moisture from the air, and it produces iron sulfates, which is this kind of powdery white stuff that you see here. The sulfur comes out of the pyrite, and the hydroxyl from the water replaces it, and that molecule is just a little bit bigger, and so it swells up and cracks up. And this one, I've had this one for probably 15 years, and another 15 years it will probably be just a pile of pieces, and I'll throw it out. But till then, I'll enjoy it. But pyrite and a close relative marcasite are notorious for doing that in some circumstances. So that's one thing that you have to, one care and feeding consideration in looking after rocks. Another is that some rocks or some minerals like halite, which is ordinary table salt, sodium chloride, absorb water out of the air, and as you know, salt dissolves in water. So if you have salt absorbing water, it dissolves. And you can just end up with a little kind of salty puddle on a hot day where you had a halite specimen previously. So you need to be aware of that. I don't live in an air-conditioned environment, and so even though there are some minerals that would be really kind of neat to have specimens of, I know they wouldn't last, and so there's no point spending money on them if they're just going to dissolve and trickle away. There's a story, too, about another mineral species that does that. It was back in 1963, a guy named Wallace Kleck, who teaches at a college in Southern California, took geology students on a field trip to the Bristol Dry Lake, which is a famous locality for collecting these evaporite minerals, things like halite and gypsum and a vast array of others. And in some little pools, he found some clusters of crystals that he didn't recognize. They were long, thin prisms like lead pencils. They were clear and white. So he carefully picked some up, wrapped them up in newspaper, which is the usual way of protecting specimens, take them back to the college. The next day, he went to unwrap it, and the newspaper was soaking wet, and it was empty. And he figured that the students were playing a prank on him. They had taken his specimen and stashed it somewhere. But they denied it, and another student who had collected a piece of the same stuff said that he'd had the same experience, got home and the paper was empty. So he went back and collected another piece and sealed it up in a mason jar so it wouldn't absorb moisture and set it on a shelf for further investigation. It couldn't possibly be a new mineral species. It's a well-known locality. It's right beside a road. But 2 years later, he saw an abstract published of a new mineral described from Antarctica, Antarcticite, which is identical to what he had just found 2 years previously and hadn't bothered to pursue. It is the property is called hygroscopic. It absorbs water. So hygroscopic that at room temperature, it absorbs enough water out of the air and dissolves itself and washes away. So most minerals aren't that sensitive, but in caring for a collection, you get satisfaction of providing for their needs, at least to the extent that they can. There also are some minerals that are very light sensitive. Some silver compounds. There's silver sulfides are a beautiful ruby red, but they turn black after exposure to light for a while. So if you have a good specimen of that, you need to keep it in the dark and just peek at it occasionally. But you can't just set it out in a lighted display case like that because it'll just turn black over the years. Realgar, it's an arsenic sulfide. In exposure to light, just turns to a yellow powder and crumbles away. I've seen displays where there's a label sitting there that says realgar, but there's just a pile of yellow powder, and realgar's bright red. And so, rocks don't die in the sense that we think of dying, but you still have to take care of them. Aesthetic considerations, some rocks are just plain pretty. Rocks have been used as tools forever. I think it has to be the attractiveness of the rocks. These are some I'll just pass because they're indestructible and you got to see them up close. But some rocks are just plain pretty. They're going to catch your eye, and they're nice. They're nice to have around. This little polished slab was not, of course, found in this state, but occasionally, cutting and polishing it's a nice thing to do sometimes. I don't hardly ever do any of it myself, but once in a while you have some material that really benefits from being treated that way. The attractiveness of the rocks is probably what motivated the first rock collector to collect a rock, something that looked interesting and appealed to him or her. And that then became more refined over the years to the business of gemstones. There are certain stones that are so beautiful, and they're also very durable and fairly uncommon that people covet them, and they become economically important. The precious stones, diamond, emerald, ruby, sapphire, and gazillions of semi-precious stones, amethyst and aquamarine, and all the different colored garnets and topaz and so forth. They're not only just neat to look at, but it's a major industry. And Yes.
Has this been polished at all?
No, that's
Okay.
just the way I picked it up.
That's the way you picked it
Yep.
up.
Yep. There's also another rank below the semi-precious stones or decorative stones, which are, well, like this is a piece of granite, which sort of thing that's used for facing buildings and making gravestones and whatever else. One surface of this has been polished, but that's a rock. It's a decorative stone that combines durability and beauty, and in this case, not rarity, because it's not very expensive, and you can afford to face a whole building with it. There are other decorative stones. I think this is just limestone. I haven't, of course, done any real destructive testing on it to be sure, but I think it's just limestone that's been cracked up, and refer to that as brecciated, where the rock is just sort of shattered and the pieces shift a little bit, and then the spaces get filled in with some other material and cemented back together. But that makes that's an attractive piece of material. And then there's this stuff, which was absolutely unknown in the world until the 1970s, when a deposit of it was discovered out in the absolutely middle of nowhere in Siberia. And there's a lot of it there in that one spot, and I don't think it's ever been found anywhere else in the world. It's called charoite, after the Charo River, which is the area that it's in. And it's a very popular decorative stone, formed in a very unique geologic environment. And this little box is kind of gaudy, really, with all that charoite. But there's also some other fairly rare minerals mixed in with it as well. But it's another example of decorative stones, and just another thing that appeals to people about rocks. Some of them are attractive. There's towards spiritual properties or spiritual ideas about stones. There's, of course, a long tradition going back, to the very beginning of when people were keeping track of things, probably, of attributing all kinds of magical properties to stones of different kinds. And I don't, as far as the stones themselves having powers, something that I don't put a lot of stock in myself, although I know a lot of people do. But there's a line in As You Like It by Shakespeare. I looked it up, it's Act 2, Scene 1, where the idea of sermons in stones is mentioned. The characters are talking about being out in the woods and being relatively carefree, and here you find tongues in trees and books in brooks, sermons in stones, and what was the last line? Anyway, I think the beauty of things, not just of minerals, but beauty in general, is really important to me spiritually, because you think of just what is beauty itself. It's a property that things have apart from whatever their practical function is, that evokes pleasure, when you experience it. And it's really a wild idea that things should have this property. And I think thinking up something like beauty is probably beyond human capacity. I think that's something that we're able to perceive it, but whether we could think of endowing things with a property like that is unlikely. So just the existence of beauty is something that to me argues in favor of there being a God, by whatever name you know him, her, or it, but something that transcends us. And first of all, just to have this property imparted to things around, anything at all, let alone the rocks under our feet. And secondly, to be granted the capacity to perceive it and appreciate it is a tremendous gift. And rocks and minerals are one of the phenomena of nature that reinforce that for me every time I come across them. So whether a particular stone can heal your gout or whatever, I don't know, but they certainly are inspiring in their own way. This is a specimen that I won't pass around because it is kind of fragile, but I'll kind of give you a look at it. The little cubes are crystals of galena, which is lead sulfide, and the brown kind of shiny stuff underneath is sphalerite, which is a zinc sulfide from somewhere in what's known as the tri-state region, which is where Kansas and Missouri and Oklahoma join, around Joplin, Missouri, and Pitcher, Oklahoma, and Manhattan, Kansas, that territory. The thing to notice here is just how regular and rigorously geometric those little cubes are. They're got flat faces, and they got sharp edges and pointy corners, and they were not helped into this state by any human means. This is just the way they came out of the ground. So there is some really powerful force of nature behind that, imposing that kind of order on these things. But at the same time, you notice that they're all, how they're oriented. They're pretty much randomly oriented. So there's some order, obviously some order here, real high degree of order, but then the orderly bits are arranged in a real disorderly fashion. So this is the kind of thing that I had in mind when I the description that you would see order and chaos square off before your eyes. Who's in charge? There's another example of that kind of thing. Here is a piece of fairly ordinary, it's pretty pale for schist, but it's still schist. And it has a little bit of grain to it and so on. But out in the middle of it, there's this big gold pyrite crystal sticking out, or a little cluster of it. And here again, you have that struggle between the kind of disorderliness of the surrounding rock. There's something working fairly hard to against order, but that little group of pyrite crystals was also putting a lot of effort into forming perfectly geometrically flat and sharp. But there's, I don't know how many, 1, 2, 3, there's about 4 individual pyrite crystals there, but they're randomly oriented in their little clump. So what's going on? I don't know. But it's kind of intriguing. And just another example here. This is a geode, and it's relatively smooth ball-shaped rock, but it's not perfectly spherical. It's got some irregularity to it. Inside, you've got a whole bunch of sparkly quartz crystals, and if you were to look at it under magnification, every one of those quartz crystals would be virtually identical. They're all the same size. If you had an instrument small enough to measure the angles between the faces on all those crystals, it would be exactly the same from crystal to crystal. So they're very consistent, very orderly, but they're all randomly distributed in there, pointing every which way. And then just sort of artistically arranged, there are those little curls of the pink dolomite, which have a nice kind of appealing randomness to them, but they're still pretty orderly. You can, one cluster is a lot like the next. You can tell it's the same basic stuff. And then out there in the middle of all that, there's one calcite crystal perched right there. And so there's a lot going on in that little rock. I'm just always amazed when dealing with rocks out, whether I'm in a quarry or a mine or just a roadside or wherever, and we find just this plain dull rock with a little cavity in it, and in this cavity, amidst all this chaos, there's a perfect, transparent, pointy, sharp, flat-faced, straight-edged crystal sitting right in the middle of all of it. What's going on with that? That's just amazing. So why collect rocks? Well, there's all that. There's some practical benefits as far as science is concerned. The geologic world keeps track of properly described mineral species. You know, it's a mineral is something that it's a solid material that can form crystals that has, among other things, a consistent, predictable chemical composition. And so when somebody describes a new combination of those things, it can be approved as a new mineral species. And there's about 3,500, give or take, species of minerals in the world, about 3,000 of which you'll probably never encounter. But collectors, amateurs like me, are often the ones who bring new species to the attention of the professional mineralogists, because professional mineralogists are generally college professors who have to spend their time teaching and publishing and things like that. They don't get to go out mucking around in piles of rock. It's somebody like me will find something that I've never seen before, and I'll show it around to people I know, and they've never seen it before either. So eventually it'll make its way to an academic person who says, let's look into this a little further. And 5 or 10 years later, when they finally get a chance to get around to it, it may end up being described as a new species. And once in a while, they're at least of theoretic interest, and once in a while something of practical interest comes out of that way as well. And there's a popular field guide. It's the Rocks and Minerals in North America that's in the Peterson Field Guide series by Fred Poe. In the back of some of the 1950s and 60s editions, there was a chapter on prospecting for uranium and tungsten, because rock hounds going out after dark with their ultraviolet lights were finding deposits of tungsten that geologists didn't know were there, or they get a Geiger counter from by mail order from Edmund Scientific Company and go around and track down a uranium deposit somewhere. And during the Cold War, that was important stuff, because the uranium that went into the first atomic bombs, the Manhattan Project, was mined in Zaire. And we had to import it. We've got a little uranium in the US, but not nearly as much as there is elsewhere. So the government was encouraging hobbyists to get out there and find some here on our home turf. There's history in a lot of these specimens. Some of the specimens themselves go back a long ways. Here's one that I bought at a sale, a show a few years ago, that it has a little label pasted to it that it says Argentiferous galena, which it means it's silver-bearing galena. And it's just a little lump of massive galena, and it's a staggeringly unimpressive rock. But the rest of the label gives the locality as Black Hills, D period, T period, Dakota Territory. Well, there was just one Dakota Territory until 1889, when North and South Dakota became a state. And it has the dealer's name on here, L.W. Stillwell, Deadwood, Dakota Territory. Well, Deadwood wasn't founded until about 1880. I looked this up and I didn't refresh my memory. So I did some research and found out a little bit about this guy. Turns out he worked in a bank in Deadwood, but ran a curio shop on the side, sold Indian artifacts and natural history items, eventually supplying natural history specimens to museums all over the world from the Black Hills. And this came from a collection of ore material from the University of Chicago that was being thinned out, I guess. And this dealer got hold of it that I bought it from. So, it's an extremely unremarkable little rock, but what I was buying was the label stuck to it, and that was kind of cool. Also from the Black Hills, this is one that I was passed around. We know that The Black Hills was the subject of the Fort Laramie Treaty, which was the last negotiation in which the Native Americans negotiated, a Native American nation negotiated with the United States from a position of strength. And there was real bargaining going on there. And the result of that treaty granted the Lakota people possession of the Black Hills in perpetuity, forever. That was 1869, I think. But there were also rumors circulating that there was gold in the Black Hills. And in 1874, George Armstrong Custer led an expedition into the Black Hills exploring, and he included some geologists and experienced prospectors in the party. And sure enough, they found gold in the Black Hills. And shortly thereafter, there was such a land rush that the Fort Laramie Treaty was out the window, and things like Mount Rushmore were done to them, and all sorts of things happened. But this is not 140-year-old gold. It was just mined probably since 1990 at a little prospect in Custer County, South Dakota. But that's the stuff they were after. Sometimes specimens become kind of keepsakes or mementos or heirlooms or something. This is another specimen of gold from the Black Hills. This is from the Homestake mine at Lead up in the north end of the Black Hills. And for one thing, it's unusual because relatively little visible gold was found in that mine. It's usually so finely disseminated. They just had, mill it and chemically recover it, and you never actually saw the gold until it was refined and poured into a bar. But once in a while, some visible gold was found. And this piece was given to me by Willard Roberts, who was a mineralogist at the Dakota School of Mines in Rapid City. He's a very well-known, very well-respected mineralogist and collector. He was not the one to sit at his desk and let people bring him rocks. He was out pounding on the rocks himself every chance he could get. And he's, of course, since deceased, but just having a specimen from him with his label, with his name on it and so on is kind of cool. There's also one other old specimen that I'll point out. I won't bother getting it out of the case, but the top one in the center row, or the center one in the top row, whichever way you look at it, in this case a white one, it's a very unusual specimen. It's a pseudomorph of talc after quartz. They're shaped like quartz crystals, but if you were to chip a little bit off and analyze it, you would find instead it's talc. I don't know exactly how that came about. It's a really bizarre replacement. But specimens like that were found in this region of what's now Germany back in the middle of the 19th century, and really not since. So that specimen, we refer to the age of specimens not like with fossils, how long ago the critter lived, but by how long it's been in collections. And so that's a very old specimen. It's 150 years old at least. And all I know is the dealer I purchased it from and the collector that he purchased it from. And before that, its history is a mystery. But that piece has sat in a lot of display cases and passed through a lot of people's hands over the years. And it would be interesting to know, where all it's been and what other rocks it's kept company with and things like that. It's kind of entertaining to line up some specimens that are, just see, what kind of a geographic range they represent. That's not how I organized this case here. I just tried to find some big, relatively flashy ones that would hold their own in that case. But just seeing where all in the world they're from, we've got Peru and Raymond, Iowa, and Peru again, Patterson, New Jersey, Jalgaon, India, which is up to kind of the northwest part of India, Romania, Ireland, Iowa City, China, and Mexico. And all these little bits of real estate from all around the world kind of congregate together here. And it gives me an excuse to learn geography a little better, and also some history of geography. There's a mining region kind of on the border, what's now the border between what used to be East Germany and Czechoslovakia, called the Erzgebirge, the Ore Mountains. And people have been mining there since Roman times or before. There's a place called, well, very old labels will call it Johann Georgenstadt. But nowadays, and that was in more or less a German state. Nowadays, that is in Czechoslovakia, except it's not Czechoslovakia anymore, it's the Czech Republic, and it's called Yakimov. But, you know, the same, that rock, you know, could have been sitting on the shelf, you know, undisturbed for years, but its locality keeps jumping back and forth over the border, and the name keeps changing and things like that. So it's keeping up with localities and things like that kind of gives me an excuse to learn geography and history somewhat, just to make sense of it all. You know, practical reasons, you know, rocks don't die usually, and they're attractive, and they're intellectually stimulating and spiritually inspiring, and it's just plain fun. Iowa's two big claims to fame mineral-wise are the geodes that occur. It's confusing, geography is confusing here because it encompasses 3 states, but if you do about a 40-mile radius around the town of Keokuk, there's a lot of really exceptional geodes found in that area. And the other thing that Iowa's known for is an uncommon mineral called millerite, which those 2 flat cases over here, the top left one, this one, it's a nickel sulfide. There's little sprays, little golden needles that this region of Iowa is one of not too many places in the world where good millerite is found. Also, the center piece on the bottom row over there, those golden calcite crystals, are from the Klein Quarry on the west edge of Iowa City, which were a total surprise to me, but I recovered from the surprise and managed to collect a number of them. There are some collectors are systematic collectors, and their goal is to get specimens of as many species as they can, which is, you know, quite a pursuit, quite a quest to go on. Keep a person busy, you can spend a lot of money, and that doesn't interest me particularly, but it does, you know, it interests some people. There are lots of ways of organizing a collection or deciding kind of how to go about collecting. You could focus on, you know, one geographic area. You could actually make a fairly interesting collection of minerals that are just found here in Iowa. It's not like, say, a collection of all the minerals that occur in Colorado, but there's still some pretty neat things to be found here. You could concentrate on just well-formed crystals of things. You could concentrate on gem materials and lapidary, you know, get into that end of things. You could concentrate on flashy displayable specimens, or kind of quirky, interesting things like the wobbly sandstone that it's hard to display in a case, you know, but you know something about it that's kind of neat. You could concentrate on rocks as opposed to minerals. You know, like this one case here, the minerals in that one case of rocks really don't amount to much, but the forms they took as rocks are kind of cool. That's a possible focus. Some people make a specialty of one species or one group, like some people collect calcite, and there's so much variety in calcite that you can make a large, worthwhile, satisfying collection of nothing but calcium carbonate. Fluorite is another one that comes in lots of nice colors and well-formed crystals, and you can make a nice little kind of specialty of that. There are no rules about, you don't have to fit yourself into one of these categories. The bottom line is to make it worth your while and be, satisfying to suit your own interests. But it helps sometimes to kind of point yourself in one direction or another, just to give you a little focus. There's some adventure involved in collecting. I have not had any real high adventure in field collecting, apart from getting treed by a dog once in a mine in the Black Hills. But the stories that other collectors tell, and a number of which I think are probably true, make interesting reading at any rate, and give you an idea and appreciation for what some of the specimens go through. Sometimes when looking at specimens at a dealer's stock or at a show, you see a lot of them show a little damage of some sort, and you think, couldn't they be a little more careful? But then if you find yourself out on the rock pile yourself, wielding a sledgehammer and chisel and so on, you realize that it's a miracle that any of them get out in one piece, let alone enough to fill, cases like this. So whether or not the collector has adventures in obtaining the specimens, a lot of the specimens have had adventures in, getting to you, and thinking of where all they've been and what all they've done is part of the fun. Field collecting is not easy to just logistically, especially around here, because there's so little public property and people are touchy about private property. So in the West, where there's more public land, it's easier to go field collecting. And in the East, where there's even less than there is here, it's proportionately harder. But yeah, whenever I can, the club in Cedar Rapids takes field trips periodically, and whenever I'm someplace where there appear to be rocks that are A, potentially worthwhile, and B, legitimately free for the taking, I'll cast an eye over them and see what's to be had. A generation ago, it was much easier. Mines and quarries, a person could basically go to the gate and ask, or if they were closed, go in and help yourself. But the legal climate is such that, especially east of the Mississippi, more populated areas, it's extremely difficult to get permission, even for an organized club with proof of insurance and hard hats and steel-toed boots and everything else, to get permission to enter these places and collect. Absolutely strictly no trespassing. The only way to get into them as a collector is as a member of the Cedar Valley Rocks and Minerals Society on a prearranged field trip. And the club carries its own liability insurance, and the way that the trip is run, people meet at the gate at 8 in the morning, and when everybody's there, you sign in on the club's release form and you sign in on the company's release form, and they unlock the gate and everybody drives in. They lock up the gate behind us, and you stay in until noon. When somebody wants to leave can, otherwise you're there till 4. And you need to be acquainted with safety principles and procedures. Always wear a hard hat, always wear steel-toed shoes, wear eye protection. Supposed to have eye protection on all the time, but definitely when you're working with tools or around people working with tools. You watch your step. You don't drive through water because you don't know how deep it is. You don't step in water unless you can clearly see the bottom, and preferably have a stick to poke and make sure it's not going to go down to your waist. Don't stay away from the edges of walls, either from above or below. Don't get within probably 5 or 10 feet of a
a wall from below. If you find wires sticking out of a rock, don't pull on them because they may still have undetonated charges at the other end. Stay away from machinery and equipment. So on and so forth. Other parts of the country, there's wildlife you have to worry about. You know, rattlesnakes, scorpions, old mines. You may find larger wildlife. Down in the southwest, there are little wild pigs called javelinas, which, I mean, they won't attack you, but you can still get trampled by them. So you gotta, when you're in places where there's, when you're climbing, yeah, you have to have plenty of water with you, drinking water. First aid kit, you don't go alone, you go with somebody. You leave a contact who knows where you went and when. Quarry, you don't want to climb on the walls because, you know, a natural cliff has spent thousands of years kind of stabilizing, and the loose stuff is probably kind of settled. Something that was just blasted last week, you don't know what's going to let go. And I've been in quarries when, you know, a ton of rock, just without any warning off the wall, just lets go and drops. So, you know, stay away from the walls, especially this time of year or February and March when it's freezing and thawing overnight and so on. You just really got to watch yourself. And it only takes one person getting injured, or worse yet, getting killed, to get the entire field trip program totally canceled and wiped out, and nobody will ever collect on that company's property again because the lawyers just won't let them. So everybody's got to be careful, mind your manners, and watch your step and all that. Assortment of hammers. I've got I don't have a really big sledgehammer. That's one thing I'm in the market for. I've finally decided that it's really worth having, you know, a 15, 20, 30 pound sledgehammer. But I have a really good quality Estwing rock pick with a leather grip, laminated leather grip handle. It's much better than the rubber grip. It's shaped, it's got a head shaped comes to a point, and then the handle. And you don't strike with the pick. It's dangerous, and you'll wear it out anyway. But use that for prying. And so I have a good rock pick, and I've got a couple small sledgehammers, and an assortment of cold chisels, which you use for soft rock like limestone. You can just dig through. Harder stuff like granite, you need to find a crack that's already there and drive the chisel into it and spread it, because you don't get anywhere just taking on. Yeah. And let's see, those things, tweezers for picking up little pieces out of holes, and a magnifier. Yep. A good hand lens is a very worthwhile investment. This is a 10 power triplet lens, and happens to be made in former Soviet Union, but it's a really a good lens is a very worthwhile thing to have. And packing and wrapping materials to protect what you find. For really soft, delicate things, like dry cleaner bags, you kind of crumple that up. It's a real soft. Cotton is bad because the little fibers tangle things up, and sometimes impossible to clean out later. It drives me up the wall to get something that's been packed in cotton. It's got a little fuzz all through it. So plastic or tissues, Kleenex. The fibers from Kleenexes are shorter, and so they don't tangle things up. You can blow and get them out. Newspaper for just sort of rough wrapping, and boxes. And for something that is like millerite, that, you know, something that's in just extremely delicate hairs and so on that you don't want anything in contact with, I've got some putty that I can stick it down in a box by the base so it's not tumbling around and wrapped in something. I carry a fanny pack, and egg cartons are handy. The sort of the standard unit of measuring quantities of mineral specimens is the flat that pop cans, beer cans come in. So like there's one down there. If somebody has found a deposit of specimens or something, you know, the magnitude of it is measured by how many flats of specimens it produced. So I'll take, on a field trip to one of the quarries here in town, I'll take 2 or 3 flats and an egg carton and some newspapers and my little plastic box with a putty for sticking tiny things in, and hope I don't find anything that won't fit. This piece from Pint's Quarry in Raymond, Iowa, this is a calcite crystal. That was a fabulous collecting site. The rock, the limestone there is like Swiss cheese, and every cavity has crystals of calcite, barite, fluorite, pyrite, marcasite, amazing stuff. This was in a big boulder, as I recall, you know, a little bigger than a basketball, and definitely too big to carry home. But it had a cavity showing on the side that was full of mud. And, you know, just kind of poking in the mud, I could see, you know, a big crystal face here, and thought, well, this might be worth going after. So you start going at it with a sledgehammer and, you know, reducing the size, and some of the mud started, you know, falling out of the pocket and so on. This point of the crystal was very nearly against the other side of the cavity, so it was, you know, not real big. But I, with some skill and luck, lots of luck, managed to get it reduced down to this size, and came home with a nice calcite crystal. It's just been washed off. That's the way it came out of the ground. Garnet holds up fairly well, but under some conditions it can change. Garnets come in every color but blue. You know, the deep red is the most familiar garnet color, but I don't have a real complete assortment of garnet colors over there, but they're, you know, come in green, yellow, brown, colorless.
And it's the crystal structure that tells you what it is.
Crystal structure and the composition. Yep. And it's identifying which particular species it is. You have to know the environment it came from, and ultimately you need to have it x-rayed or something, x-ray diffraction pattern to see, you know, what's in it. But this case of specimens represents a phenomenon that I find really fascinating. They're what are known as pseudomorphs. The title in the back says these crystals ain't what they used to be, and it's literally true, because in each case they started out as a fairly normal crystal of some mineral. Like, for example, down here in the corner, that started out as a crystal of pyrite, which is iron sulfide, and it underwent chemical changes in a really slow, orderly way. So the sulfur got knocked out and was replaced by little hydroxyl groups, the OH, hydrogen and oxygen, and it changed into a different mineral. It's now a combination of iron oxides. It's not pyrite anymore at all, but it still has the outward form of that original pyrite crystal. So the name pseudomorph means false form. They're Greek roots. So all of these have the form of one mineral, but the composition of another. I have managed to come up with a few pairs of before and after, an example of the original mineral and then a very similar looking pseudomorph that shows the same crystal form, but it's changed. Azurite and malachite are a very common combination to find in pseudomorphs. They're both copper carbonates. They just have a subtle difference in the crystal structure so that they affect the way light reflects from them. And azurite looks blue and malachite looks green. And malachite is a little more stable chemically than azurite is. So sometimes the conditions change enough that at the molecular level the crystal structure sort of snaps and it's not azurite anymore, it's malachite. And it doesn't look blue anymore, it looks green. That phenomenon can take place over a fairly short period of time. Back in the Renaissance, painters were using natural mineral pigments for paints. The very highest quality blue pigment, the ultramarine blue, was made from the rock that you might know as lapis lazuli. And it's fairly rare, hard to come by, and true ultramarine pigment was really expensive. But azurite, which is another relatively common blue mineral, it's fairly easy to come by, and azurite blue pigments were a lot cheaper. Problem is that you paint something blue, a sky, a sea, whatever, and over the course of 50 or 100 years, the molecules snap and it turns into malachite and it's green now. So that phenomenon was noticed, and people commissioning high quality artworks would specify genuine ultramarine blue because they don't want their sky turning green when the cheap azurite pigment turns to malachite. So that's one that can take place over a fairly short period of time. As far as how long it took for these individual pieces to be replaced by something else, it's very hard to know. So that's what the this after that is about. It started out as one mineral and got turned into something else by. Speaking of rocks, I do have one peculiar one here. You've seen this one before, haven't you? This is a piece of sandstone, and it's a very unremarkable looking. Actually, I can take hold of it. And you notice anything else peculiar about it?
Layered and
The striations you always
sandy.
get, don't you?
Mm-hmm.
Textured.
And actually, it's probably most.
Oh,
Oh,
flexible.
It flexes. You got to be gentle with it. So this piece of sandstone doesn't look real remarkable, but one thing it does is it wobbles. It's from somewhere in North Carolina, and I don't know just where. I purchased it, of course. I don't find neat things like this. I got to buy them. But it's a sandstone, as you know, is just sand that's compacted together. Sometimes it's cemented a little bit with some calcite or clay or quartz or something. This has a little bit of mica in it, which I think you noticed on this natural surface here. You can see some of the little sparkles. This has been compressed and heated and deformed just enough that the sand grains have kind of squished around each other and locked together, but it hasn't been heated and melted together enough to solidify it. And having the mica in it helps lubricate it a little bit, so it wobbles. Kind of a local nickname for it in the Appalachians is limbergrit, which is a kind of a fun name. You find it in sheets, it kind of peels apart, and then this has been a fairly thick piece of it that's been sawed. I bought this I was visiting, I have an uncle who was on the faculty of East Carolina University in Greenville, and when I was visiting there, the geology department just happened to be having their annual kind of closet cleaning sale, and they had some pieces of this, and so I bought all they had. But it's. Is
it just a curiosity? Does it use that for anything?
No, it's just use it just to amuse people with. It's so much fun just to hand it to somebody without don't say a word, and they're kind of looking it over, and they're, whoa, it's just bent. My favorite all-around, especially beginner's book for an adult beginner, somebody just starting out, is Unfortunately, it's not real attractive, but not real photogenic. But it's the Audubon Society Field Guide to North American Rocks and Minerals. When it's sold, it has a little, not a full dust jacket, but a little band around it that's real colorful. Let's see, that's the half title page, and it doesn't even have an attractive title page. They put their effort into the content. The real strength of this book is the illustrations. So many field guides will give you one picture of something, and that is next to worthless in most cases. This one shows you lots and lots of pictures, and you may or may not find one, but if they show you 10 pictures of calcite, you're more likely to find something that at least resembles the one in your hand than if they only show you one that happened to be totally different. Calcite is, my wife Bethany gives me a hard time. She says, I call everything either calcite or barite, and it doesn't matter what it looks like because I'll call it one or the other because either of them can take so many forms. A particular combination of crystal faces, a group of faces that always occur together at the same angle is known as a form. So pyrite, you've got the cube, those 6 faces that form a cube are one form. The 8 faces that make up an octahedron are one crystal form. The faces, the pair of parallel faces that make the top and bottom of like a beryl crystal are one crystal form, and so on. Most minerals will have a very limited number of crystal forms. Garnet has 2. You're only going to find dodecahedrons and trapezohedrons, and once in a blue moon, little cube faces, but those are, I've never seen them. Calcite, on the other hand, has over 300 documented crystal forms, sets of faces at particular angles, and those occur in all kinds of combinations. So calcite varies all over the map, and chances of finding a picture in the book that happens to match the one you got in your hand are next to none. But if you've got a lot of pictures and good helpful text, that helps. The other ones that I brought, I thought of a couple others that I should have but didn't. This is the good old Golden Guide. They've been around forever, and I don't know if they've really been improved on much. The illustrations are a little dated, and some of the text sounds a little dated, but it's good, solid, basic material that, like I said, is it's hard to beat for you got somebody 5th, 6th, 7th, 8th grade.
And they still sell that.
Oh yeah, it's still in print. This is the more advanced version of the same one. I love the illustrations in it. It's got some really good hard technical data. It goes into the chemistry of things. That's a good one. And for somebody who really wants to dig into what makes them tick, this is a very good one. Mineralogy. It was originally published under the title Mineralogy for Amateurs. It's about 40 years old. Johnson Conkus is a very well-known person in the field. He died just the last few years. And this is another book that is classic. It's really hard to beat. Excellent, authoritative text. Illustrations are all black and white, but they're pretty good. Excellent crystal drawings, and lots and lots of really good information. So a person can learn a lot.